What are INFJs like as intellectuals? I think this is an interesting question because, on the one hand, a lot of INFJs, whether male or female, will tend to be seen as intellectual types by a lot of people. But there is a distinction between sort of being perceived as an intellectual type and being an intellectual. Like, intellectual as a category nowadays anyway, is perceived as someone who is quite rational, is interested in ideas, but in applying rational schemes to the exploration of ideas, has either an academic style or academic pretensions, perhaps an academic career, aspires to be an academic, is serious and has a kind of, I wouldn't say workmanlike, but I would say, a commitment to the explanation of some section of reality according to some particular school or theory or paradigm, and pursues that research, again, within an academic context or outside of an academic context. So initially I wanted to title this video, "What are INFJs like as academics?" But I thought maybe this was a little bit restrictive because there's definitely intellectual types that are not academics. They're not in academia. There's so few positions available in academia. There's obviously going to be a lot more intellectual types than there are actual academics. But certainly the intellectual type is at some level a bit of an academic type. And it's interesting to look at the phenomenon of being an intellectual among INFJs because there are some paradoxes at work, right? Intellectual INFJs, it's often said that they are more likely to come across as INTPs or perhaps INTJs than your average INFJ. I don't think that's quite true. I think that they are still likely to come across as INFJs. If you think of Carl Jung, though, I mean, you'll have a good example of that. To a lot of people, Carl Jung is an INFJ. I think he's an INFJ. I've made videos trying to argue or demonstrate that he was an INFJ. Definitely the more intellectual type of INFJ, if you read his books or if you listen to him. There are people who think he's an INTP on the basis of how he comes across, not just on the basis of his self-typing. So it will tell you that, like some INFJs who are of the intellectual persuasion or type will come across maybe as INTPs sometimes to the untrained eye, I should say. But, and I'm completely leaving Carl Jung aside here because that doesn't apply to him. But what I would say is that it's interesting. INFJs of the intellectual type, and I would definitely have classified myself as belonging to that category in a kind of self-conscious, deliberate sense for many, many years, although less and less now. I'm not to say that I'm not intellectual in some ways, but I don't really identify as an intellectual anymore, as an intellectual INFJ, at least as far as I perceive myself. But intellectual INFJs, and I've come across many, they will tend to have a weird relationship with, not necessarily with the fact of being INFJ, but at least not consciously with the fact of being INFJ, but often they will be critical and skeptical of others INFJs' perceived lack of intellectuality. And by what I mean when I say this is that, well, a lot of INFJs are more mystical, a lot of INFJs are more spiritual, they are more interested in the esoteric. And it belongs to the sort of essence of an I to be attracted to patterns of meaning that can't be quite rationalized or explained in terms of rational schemes of interpretation. And so you'll have that population of highly intellectual INFJs who will have a kind of unconsciously masochistic relationship with their own type, where they reject that side of their own type, and they're actually trying to be not like that, to be purely rational, to be purely disengaged, detached, and objective in their conception of external reality. and even of their internal reality, will focus on cause and effect, will focus on materialism sometimes, or reductionism, reductive schemes, and will partly define their identity by rejecting the, I don't want to say the paranormal, but anything that is meaningful beyond the black and white schemes of rational analysis. And as these INFJs mature, I think they come to embrace their more spiritual side, because it's, I think, and this is what I argue, in fact, in this book, The Infinite Soul, which is my new book, by the way. If you want to get a copy, it's called The Infinite Soul, INFJ Life in the Modern World. Looks at how INFJs can find purpose, meaningfulness, and a rich existence in the modern world. The world is often felt to be hostile to the INFJ life. I do say that it's in chapter 3, in fact. There's chapter 3, which is called Reconnecting with Spirit. All INFJs are spiritual at some level, and if you don't embrace that side of you with an expansive understanding of what spirituality means, you're going to be frustrated, possibly neurotic as well, or more neurotic than you would be if you embraced your spiritual side. And so you can get the book at the link below, or leave a review if you loved it but haven't reviewed it yet. Helps with the referencing, by the way. So the highly intellectual INFJ, who maybe is aware that they're smart, that they're sharp at some level, maybe they have a high IQ, that kind of thing, will often tend to want to be more like INTPs and INTJs, or at least how they perceive INTPs and INTJs to be, because that's not necessarily the truth about them, especially INTJs, because INTJs are also NI dominant, and will be dismissive, often will be dismissive. But the risk is that they end up pursuing careers that ultimately don't satisfy them completely, because there are particular areas, particular careers where the emphasis on pure rationality is basically overwhelming or pervasive. And these INFJs might convince themselves that that's where they belong, but that actually will be a projection a lot of the time. And that, if you like, that denigration and that repression of their spiritual essence will entail a kind of hunger that won't be satisfied, and might lead to job dissatisfaction, activities that are not completely satisfying to them, and they might not be able to explain why, but often it ends up being about that. Now, of course, sometimes that can be compensated by having activities and hobbies, and forms of engagement outside of work that satisfy that hunger. But first of all, you have to realize that if you're a highly intellectual kind of INFJ, that does not mean that you're not going to be at some level connected with non-intellectual or usual proclivities that are not described as intellectual in the first place. Search for patterns of meaning that are transcending purely rational schemes. So this is something that's worth keeping in mind, okay? Let me know what you think in the comments, guys. Don't forget that you can also get my book on the INFJ, The Ecstatic Soul, which is the prequel to The Infinite Soul. It's called A New Look at the INFJ Personality. Goes deep in terms of analyzing INFJ consciousness and its existential manifestations. Lots of really good reviews. Check it out. Link is below. And as you know, the lifeblood of my channel is my Patreon page. If you would consider supporting me for $3.50 a month, it goes a long way towards helping me to keep producing videos. You can interact with me there, suggest content, get some access to bonus material as well. I'd be very, very grateful. Okay, see you guys next time. Bye-bye.